Is that okay with everybody?
Yep.
All right, we will now begin our Provo Municipal Council work meeting. This is our work session for the afternoon of Tuesday, August 18th, 2020. It is 1:03 p.m. This meeting will be conducted entirely via electronic means on August 10th, 2020, in accordance with Utah Code 52-4-2074. The City Council Chair, George Handley, determined that conducting meetings of the Municipal Council with an anchor location, such as the Municipal Council Chamber, presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present there. These are the facts upon which Mr. Handley, has made this determination. Utah has been in a declared state of emergency due to novel coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19, since March 6, 2020, a disease outbreak which the World Health Organization has characterized as a pandemic. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention state that COVID-19 is easily spread from person to person between people who are in close contact with one another. The spread is through respiratory droplets when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or talks, and it may be spread by people who are non-symptomatic. Federal, state, and local authorities have recommended that individuals limit public gatherings, wear face masks, and follow social distancing guidelines. Notwithstanding that Utah generally and Utah County specifically have been moved to the low-risk yellow phase, reported COVID-19 cases in Provo continue to rise at a high rate, more than 100 cases per day on a 14-day average. Physical distancing measures will be difficult to set up and maintain in the Provo City Municipal Council chamber. Additionally, the chair of the governing board for the Redevelopment Agency of Provo City has determined that its meetings are also subject to the same risks and has adopted the same procedures as the Municipal Council. This meeting will be available to the public for live broadcast and on-demand viewing at youtube.com Provo City Council. This meeting is being broadcast live on the web on the Provo City Council YouTube channel. So it will also be available for on-demand viewing. I remind participants to mute your microphone when not speaking in order to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear. Present at this work meeting are my fellow counselors. I am George Handley, Council Chair, Vice Chair Dave Harding, Dave Shipley, Bill Fillmore, Shannon Ellsworth, and Travis Hoban, with Dave Sewell excused. We're also joined by Wayne Parker, our Chief Administrative Officer. I see Isaac Paxman, Deputy Mayor, Brian Jones, our Council Attorney, Cliff Strachan, our Executive Director, and other staff who are assisting us here, as well as some guests who may be participating. And I note the presence of our Police Chief, Rich Ferguson. So we're grateful to have you all here. So Dave Sewell is not here to pray, as he was assigned. So I wonder if I would be able to call on Travis to step up to the plate for us.
Sorry, you cut out there. Who was it?
I was asking if you would be willing to offer the prayer.
Of course.
There you go.
Of course.
Okay, thank you so much, Travis.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful to gather here today as public servants of the great people of Provo. We're grateful for this opportunity we have to serve. And we ask that as we go throughout our meeting today and deliberations and conversations, that we'll be guided to make the decisions that are right for the city of Provo, all people in Provo. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Travis. I will see. It is proposed that we approve the following minutes from March 31st. These are all in 2020. April 14th, April 21st, May 5th, May 7th, and August 4th meetings. Are there any objections or requested changes to these minutes? Okay, seeing no objections, I declare The minutes approved by unanimous consent. Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. So please use the raise hand function to indicate that you would like to speak, and please wait to speak until called on by me. A note about the agenda. The order of the items on the agenda has been changed to better accommodate various presenters and attendees. The number for each item has been kept the same, but will be heard in a different order. Additionally, the 3 land use items, items 5 through 7, will not be discussed in this work meeting in order to give more time to the urgent discussion about masks. They will be heard, these items will be heard in the council meeting this evening as scheduled. So the work meeting agenda in order is as followed. Item number 4, a discussion regarding face masks in public with regards to COVID-19. Item number 2, an update about the Valley Visioning Project. Item 3, a discussion about ranked choice voting. And item number 1, a joint discussion with the Planning Commission about updating the general plan. So we'll begin then in that order with, as indicated, with item number 4, a discussion regarding face masks in public with regards to COVID-19. And I will be presenting this. I wanted to give a little bit of background on this item. This was requested by Dave Sewell sometime last week after growing concerns of his own. I had actually had some heightened level of concern as well. And so I agreed that with at least the 2 of us desiring it to be put on a work agenda, that we would do so. I want to say, first of all, I want to just sort of outline what I want to do. I'm just going to say a few things for a few minutes. I've invited 2 researchers from BYU who have done some research on the effectiveness of masks, about returning to school, and a potential for outbreaks with college-age population that I think will be very helpful for us. We've also asked, I'd like to just invite them after I speak to summarize some of their research, and then I would turn the time to Brian Jones, who I know has prepared some information for us regarding different strategies that different communities have used to encourage greater compliance with the health guidelines, and then we'll just have an open discussion. We have 60 minutes for this item. And I think our goal is really to determine whether or not we want to seriously consider creating some sort of ordinance or creating some sort of resolution as a city council, and if so, when would we be doing that? So my own, and I think I've talked with Dave Sewell quite a bit about this, so I think I'm speaking for both of us. We just happen to sort of independently come to some similar feelings about this. And then when he approached me, I think we shared our concerns. As you know, I've been an enthusiastic participant and supporter of our Mask Up campaign, especially for the month of August as we prepare for the return to school, both in our public schools and at our universities. I think a couple of things have caused me to re-examine my own assumptions about whether or not such a campaign was sufficient. And one was, as many of you know, the student dance party that happened a week or so ago that was not in compliance with the health guidelines, and the organizer himself used our lack of mask mandate as a justification for it. And it wasn't so much, although that event concerned me, there have been many other things in the city that have concerned me and throughout the county, but it did sort of trigger for me the realization that we were not as well prepared for the return of college students in the coming weeks as we need to be. And it was around that same time that I happened to be speaking with Ben Abbott, who's with us here today. And he shared with me some results that Chantel Sloan had been researching, who's also here, and about the potential for outbreaks with the return of college students, especially in the numbers that we're going to be seeing in the next couple of weeks. And I guess several alarms went off in my mind, and I thought we We have been operating on the assumption that all the data that we're looking at regarding infection rates and mortality rates and so on are based on a population that is going to significantly change in the next couple of weeks. As you remember, the stay-at-home order back in March led to a mass exodus of BYU and UVU students to return home and go into isolation with their families. And essentially, we have operated with that population no longer in our midst since that time. And there are a couple of things that I shared with the council. Ben was involved in 2 reports, and he can speak to that in a moment, one on mask effectiveness and the other on the return to schools. This came up in our joint meeting with the school district. I note one sentence in Ben's report that jumped out at me, and it says community support is, this is with regard to the importance of community support to help schools. In the research that was surveyed, quote, there was universal agreement that safe reopenings cannot be achieved by interventions at school alone. A full court approach of reducing likelihood of transmission at school while working to drive down numbers in the community is needed. And that came up. The school district was appealing to us for help. It also says in the report that college outbreaks with college students may quickly get out of hand. And quote, because of interactions outside the classroom, especially in student housing and social events, can overwhelm measures focused only on limiting exposure in classroom settings. I am, as most of you I think know, I'm an employee of BYU, and I'm glad to have seen just this week a video that is required watching for all students and all employees at Brigham Young University that outlines expectations for behavior, not only on campus, but off campus, although it's extremely difficult for universities to monitor and control behavior off campus. And I think that's where a university and a city can be a partner. And in speaking further with Chantel, and I will let her speak for herself here in a moment, but just stating the obvious, in less than 2 weeks, Provo and Orem will be very different cities than they have been since March when the students left school. And everything changes when they come to town, and she can perhaps help explain why that's the case. I want to be clear that my concerns are not intended to criminalize college students or to assume that they are the only problem or the only risk in the community. But there are some special facets of their life as college students in terms of their living conditions and their social interactions that do make the possibility of an outbreak even more likely than we would have presently. So with BYU, but BYU has, as I say, instituted this very clear set of guidelines, and I did note that BYU has a clause in that video that says if any member of the BYU community is, I don't remember exactly the wording, but essentially BYU reserves the right to withhold campus privileges from anybody who is egregiously violating those guidelines. Again, it may not be entirely clear. It's not entirely clear yet how they would know or how they're going to enforce that, but there is at least the threat that privileges will be lost. And no privileges online to access your records and so on, and even online classes is available until everyone watches this video. So I'd like to just ask Ben Abbott, who's a professor at BYU, if you could just introduce yourself briefly and just tell us a little bit about the research you've done on the effectiveness of masks and on the return to schools. And then I'd like to ask Chantel Sloan also to introduce herself and talk a little bit about why the college population is particularly challenging and important for us to pay attention to as a city. So Ben, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple of moments.
Thank you, George, and thanks to all of you for inviting us here today. My name is Ben Abbott. I'm an environmental science faculty at Brigham Young University, and I just pasted the links to the 2 reports in the chat pane here on Zoom. And basically the only thing that I'll say right now is we read over 300 peer-reviewed studies and reports, and our goal was to make the science directly available to a non-technical audience. So we tried to interpret as little as we could and just put the main findings from the scientific community so that all of us here in Utah Valley can access that information. And the main findings from the mask report were that masks are highly effective at reducing the spread of COVID-19. Specifically, they can shorten the amount of time that we have to take really invasive and difficult make changes to our lives, so they can accelerate the recovery. There are no serious side effects to wearing masks. There's been a lot of misinformation on deoxygenation and CO2 levels. There's no scientific basis for that. We go into detail on all these points in the report. However, masks work through what is called source control. So they prevent, if you have the disease, they prevent you from spreading it to other people. They're quite ineffective at filtering out external particles. So that means that they only work in the community when a large portion of individuals are wearing them. And as we looked through both success stories and failures from other areas, the only places that have been able to get the 80 or 90% compliance of people wearing masks are places that have required mask use. And that can happen at the city, county, or state level. And of course, there are other countries that have implemented it at the national level. There's a direct correlation with how severe COVID outbreaks are and the percentage of the population wearing masks. So that's the 1-minute version of the mask report. Please take a look at it. We also made all of the peer-reviewed literature available. So even if you don't have subscriptions to these journals, you can access those journal articles through a link in the report. The schools report focuses on primary and secondary schools primarily. And it's more a nuanced story there, where there have been many successful openings of primary and secondary schools worldwide, but no one has done it at the level of community spread that we are currently experiencing in Utah Valley. So the other places that have successfully reopened primary and secondary schools typically are at a rate of COVID-19 of about 20 cases per million people in the population per day. And we're at about 5 times that rate, proportional to our population right now. So again, we're hopeful that it can work, but it really is something of an experiment. We're going into uncharted territory there. However, the final part of our report goes into the college and university situation. And this is where I connected with Chantel, Dr. Sloan, and I'll turn over the rest of the time to her.
Great, thank you, Ben. Ben's been a wonderful collaborator and advocate for protecting health and safety in the community. And also thank you for allowing us to have the chance to talk with you about Provo and how we can best work together to protect the health and safety of the BYU campus community and Provo. Due to, I know, a restriction on time, I very quickly wrote and sent Elizabeth a summary document. I don't know if that made it out to everybody. I sent it to her all of 10 minutes before we started. But if it hasn't been sent out yet, that's fine. Just maybe refer to it after the meeting. It tries to give just a very lay summary of what we've done. And I know George sent out some other summary comments.
I just forwarded it, and then Hannah Salzel also has it ready, so she can do a screen share if you'd like to refer to it right now.
Okay, great. I don't think we need to do a screen share right now, but just so people have it. The main take-home points are that BYU and Provo City need to be partners in protecting our mutual communities from COVID-19 spread. There has been a lot of concern in the media lately about parties and large gatherings, and they certainly are a concern. However, the nature of a university community is so interconnected, especially through housing, that we expect major outbreaks regardless of large gatherings. Most of the outbreaks that are likely to occur, again, we hope they don't. I hope very much that we're wrong and that they don't, but they're very likely. Most of those outbreaks will occur among people who are compliant and respectful, but simply because of the way viruses work and travel, which is to take advantage of the interconnectedness of our social networks, mostly within our own households. I'm sure all of us have had experience with this in our personal lives where one member of a household gets a cold or flu and it makes its way through the rest of the household members over the course of a week or two. And that's exactly what happens with student housing as well. But student housing is unique because it's so dense and because all of those students who live together also are interacting on campus, they're interacting socially, they're interacting in work environments, on transportation. It's a series of networks that overlap each other and overlap the Provo community. We have faculty and staff whose children attend Provo schools, who live in the community, they patronize businesses, work in the community. And so it really is, and I try to highlight this in the report, just as Ben said, a two-way street, where outbreaks on BYU campus can seed large outbreaks in the community, and community outbreaks can seed could in turn feed outbreaks on campus and among that community. There really is no separating the two. The best thing we can do, given that students have already begun their phased arrival on campus, is work to reduce the spread through that network as much as possible. And that's by identifying places where the Provo community and the BYU community interact and overlap in the network and reducing spread there. I reiterate that a mask requirement is going to be essential there in businesses and closed spaces outside the home, and also on public transportation, places like the UVX bus, where so many people commute to work and school together. These are all wonderful resources, but they just are things that the virus, which is a natural force, and we don't make the rules, that's just what they take advantage of, and it's no one's fault. It's just the way that they work, and we're bound by the laws and rules set by the virus, unfortunately, and they're very good at exploiting our networks. So I do think, while I hope and very much pray that we're going to be able to avoid these large outbreaks. I know BYU's done extensive work to reduce outbreaks on campus, and we expect that will be successful on campus. There are some interactions that are unavoidable, over which BYU has far less control, and around which we need to be very vigilant. We should not expect the progress of things over summer to continue to be how things occur in fall, because the network is changing so dramatically. So it has the potential to be very serious. And I just want to reiterate that there need to be contingency plans should the worst happen. And those need to be done in partnership between BYU and the city.
Dr. Sloan, you and I spoke, and I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about, I know you told me that your final report won't be issued for a few more days, maybe, but I'm wondering if you would say anything preliminarily, and I think it's in your summary as well, but just how, when you talk about an outbreak, what kind of numbers are we looking at? And also, I've heard a lot of people saying, well, look, college-age kids are not as vulnerable to this disease in terms of mortality rates as older people. But I think you've already highlighted an issue there, which is even if they themselves do not experience high mortality rates, their ability to spread it to the community is pretty high. I'm just wondering if you could just say a little bit about like what kind of an outbreak we might be looking at and what that might mean for our community.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. So we've been working, I've been part of a team. It's myself, Dr. Mike Goodrich from computer science, and Dr. Candace Barrett from statistics, to specifically model interactions on BYU campus based on real BYU course enrollment and housing data. So it's very specific to our campus. We've been working at lightning speed, but we're just not quite done yet. It'll probably, like I said, be a few more days, if not another week. We just had another little slowdown yesterday, but what we anticipate, and predicting the future is extremely difficult. So I say this with a lot of caveats, and my colleagues and collaborators would want me to add these caveats, that we're basing this on probability of transmission in housing versus classrooms with and without masks based on the best available data, but it's predicting the future, which is never a perfect thing. But we do anticipate that these outbreaks are not going to be well contained in the absence of very restrictive quarantining and testing. So they could reach, in the absence of very extensive quarantining, thousands of students, and we would anticipate that that could happen within the first 3 weeks of school. So we are already on this trajectory. Although students are not as likely to die, thank goodness, from COVID-19, to their young and healthy circulatory systems and other factors, because of the law of large numbers, we would still expect a number of them to need hospitalization, a larger number of them to not be recovered within 2 to 3 weeks. And for every about 2,000 students infected, we would expect 1 student to unfortunately die. This, of course, depends on their comorbidity status, which means any pre-existing conditions. In the document I sent a table of what we anticipate the outcomes to be for every 1,000 students or faculty and staff infected. And those are based on real data from the Utah Department of Health based on age, comorbidity, and an individual's worst outcome. So if they were hospitalized but didn't need the ICU, they're just listed as hospitalized. If they progress to the ICU or death, then they're just included in those numbers. So we do know BYU has some quarantine plans in place. I'm not read into the extensiveness of them, but I do know that it is a major area of planning, but something that the community needs to be aware of.
Ms. Ellsworth has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, when you say 1 death per 2,000, is that 1 death per 2,000 students or 1 death per 2,000 cases?
1 death per 2,000 student cases. So that's within that younger, healthier community.
Okay, per student cases.
Yeah, that's based on the age and likely chronic disease status of BYU students.
And in your modeling, maybe this is a terrible question to ask, how many cases do you estimate?
So again, we're lots of caveats, right? Preliminary, but in the again, the only thing that really changes the numbers, and I want you to focus on the magnitude of change in the numbers rather than the raw numbers themselves. But the only thing that really changes the numbers is if you quarantine all of the contacts of a case. So if they interacted in a classroom, in housing, anyone that they contacted, and you require them to be quarantined, then we see a major drop in cases. But most of our simulations have come up with between 10 and 13,000 cases. Most of those happening within 40 days. It depends a little bit on how many students show up infected, but it's not largely driven by the number of students that come infected. We estimate probably about 40 or 50 students will come already infected with COVID-19 within the last 7 days, and that's based on rates in their home zip codes. But whether it's 1 student that comes or 100, the end numbers end up around the same. It's just, do things get sped up a little bit more on the timeline or not? That would likely also be the role of large gatherings. Would it be to speed up that timeline? And again, that's largely based on spread through housing. So in magnitude of change, quarantining reduces the spread by manyfold. I have to pull back up the latest graphs to see, but we go from about 13,000 infected in the simulations to between 500 to 1,000 cases. So that's essential, and of course requires mass testing and contact tracing.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you. You mentioned, Dr. Sloan, that about quarantining and quarantining everyone that they came into contact with. You also mentioned large gatherings, but in talking about impacts to the model and the projections of total infected, you didn't mention masks. Is that part of the model, and what kind of impact do you see with the modeling?
Yes, absolutely. We have incorporated masks into the model. So what we did was we took all of the fall 2019 student enrollment and faculty schedule data and looked at all the interactions that normally occur, and then remade the model when BYU announced the mask mandate, the changes in class schedules and different offerings, online and hybrid courses. And that's still running. We've only had a few weeks really to work through those data, and they're complicated. But we do see that is likely to be very effective at preventing spread on campus. So that's going to do wonders for protecting our faculty and staff, though we still expect there to be risk, and there will be faculty and staff infected. But the spread through classrooms, the library, the Wilk, and other places on campus where we can really control that should be dramatically improved by mask wearing. Housing remains the big intractable problem.
So the 13,000, is that including the BYU mask requirements, or is that excluding?
It's including it, but only roughly. And I since those are still running, the new models with all the hybrid classes, I hesitate to say exactly for sure how that's going to play out. But we do see a large magnitude decrease. If we weren't wearing masks in class and weren't doing new offerings, then we would expect essentially every student, faculty, and staff member to be infected within a month of school. The initial simulations from fall 2019 had 33,000 infections. And of course, that was the absolute worst case scenario that we were using. No mask wearing, very little quarantining or isolating. But just the nature of the university networks makes it prone to that level of spread.
Ms. Ellsworth, and then we're going to need to move on to Brian Jones.
And maybe, I understand you may not be comfortable speaking for BYU, but do you have any idea of what their tests will look like, or how they'll test, or what their testing plan is?
Yeah, so I've only been read into a little bit of that, and I would refer you to BYU's risk management director, Brandon Wilson. He knows everything and should be a resource for you, and I hope has already been a resource for you. I don't know what any of the background conversations have been. I'm stepping into this relationship blindly. But I do know that they have plans for contact tracing, for testing the contacts of infected cases, and also to do some admittedly very limited random testing. The ideal would be to test everybody upon arrival at campus, and then different studies have said, every 2 to 5 days thereafter, you want to test everybody, but that's totally out of reach financially and resource-wise. So we expect some very limited random testing just to get some numbers of community spread, and some very isolated testing of contacts. And I believe, and I might be speaking out of turn here, again, refer to Brandon Wilson, that the plans for exactly how that contact tracing and testing is going to work are still in being finalized.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sloan and Dr. Abbott. You're certainly welcome to continue to be in this meeting for this discussion, which should be finishing shortly after 2 p.m. But I think with what you've presented, we can turn now to Mr. Jones, who will present to us some of the suggestions or possibilities for actions that we might want to contemplate. I think what struck me about what you presented and in our earlier conversations is that the partnership between the city and the BYU could be tighter on this, and that where those points of contact happen are probably where we can focus. Mr. Jones, do you want to share some information with us?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hanley. And I'm going to apologize now for not looking at you for most of my discussion. The way my computer's set up, in order to see what I'm talking about, I have to look the other way, so you get the view of the side of my head. I'm going to, let's see, can I do a screen share? It says it's disabled. I don't know if you can.
Let me turn that on for you, Brian. Okay,
So,
try it now.
Let's see. Okay. All right, that's the wrong one though. I gotta figure out how to turn it off.
At the top of your screen, you should be able to click end share. And then if you do a new share, you can reselect what screen
okay.
It's sharing.
And maybe, are you all seeing the one with the Utah code? Is that what's
Yes.
on? Okay. All right. So just really briefly, 2-minute primer on powers regarding health and safety. So remember that as a city, we are a political subdivision of the state, and therefore the city's powers are delegated to it by the state. This code section that we've got on the screen right now, 10884, is referred to as the police power. Doesn't have anything to do with our police, but it's generally referred to as the police power. And you'll notice right here that it says that the municipal legislative body may pass all ordinances and rules necessary and proper to provide for the safety and preserve the health of the city and its inhabitants. Paraphrasing a little bit. So, but there's a legal principle that we need to talk about just to answer some of the questions that I've been hearing over the last few days, which is the idea of preemption. And so, because the state delegates to the city its authority, the state can also preempt the city's authority. And it can do that in 2 different ways. One is implicitly by passing so many regulations at the state level that there's nothing left for the city to regulate. And the other way is to explicitly forbid the city from doing something. So if we look at what the state has done regarding health, they've created a state health department, and they have mandated that local health authorities and local health departments also be created, largely by counties. And they have provided the counties with powers to provide for the preservation of health in the county, including through the use of the local health department. But the state has also provided in that same section that nothing in the chapter regarding county health powers diminishes, impairs, or affects the powers conferred upon cities and towns. So the mere fact that local health departments exist does not mean that cities don't have power over health. So with that context, we then move on to the explicit preemption, which is where the state says to a city, you just can't do something. And at the beginning of the current pandemic, the state legislature met and passed a specific chapter of the Public Safety Code entitled the COVID-19 Health and Economic Response Act. And one of the first provisions of that chapter is that if the governor adopts recommendations from the COVID Commission about a certain aspect, that no local community may pass an ordinance or an order that is more restrictive than those guidelines adopted by the governor, unless the governor specifically allows an exception. And so for the bulk of the pandemic, municipalities and counties have been unable to pass ordinances or regulations or institute orders that are more restrictive than the state's orders. So if we then ask ourselves, so let me stop this share and show you a different screen. So if we then ask ourselves what the state is doing, or what the state has done with respect to that, what the governor has done, the governor has issued a set of phased guidelines for the public and for businesses. And if you scroll through those, as many of you probably have done, many of those, there's quite a bit of discussion about in those guidelines about face coverings and social distancing. But as you know, for the most part, those are not orders. Those are recommendations and guidelines about doing those things. But based on the state statute that I just showed you, without anything else changing, cities could not pass or institute orders or regulations or ordinances that are more restrictive than the phased guidelines issued by the governor. However, on August 14th, and this wasn't the first time, this is one that supersedes another one, but on August 14th, the governor issued Executive Order 2020-50, which, among other things, in paragraph 5 says, a political subdivision desiring to adopt a mandatory face covering requirement may do so without prior approval from the Department of Health by notifying the Department of Health of their intent to adopt the requirement. So the governor has actually, at this point in time, adopted a proactive exception, allowing local municipalities to pass more stringent requirements with regard to mask coverings, but not with regard to other things. Now, the question that arises in our form of government is, what does it mean? What does the governor mean when he says if a political subdivision desires to adopt those requirements? And that in and of itself is a really interesting question and probably requires more time than we have here. But so I'm going to kind of skip it and instead look to and come back to it after we've looked at the data I sent out this morning about what other local jurisdictions have done. So I'll share that screen. So there are currently, as best I could tell from my research, there are currently 6 mask mandates in the state at this time. 3 are in towns or cities and 3 are in counties. And I'm just going to run through quickly some facts about each of those. So the town of Springdale had a 5-member council that acted through an executive action in accordance with a recommendation by the public health department in their area to require face coverings in retail and commercial establishments, in restaurants while waiting to be seated and served, and at community gatherings. And I had extra trouble finding their actual order. I just found a press release about it. It doesn't say a termination date, and it doesn't say anything about enforcement. Logan, which has our same form of government, took an executive action by the mayor to, with the governor's approval, to require face coverings for anyone over the age of 5 in public areas where social distancing is not possible, reasonable, or prudent, and directed that enforcement be primarily through education and warnings. The town of Bluff, its 5-member council requested permission from the state, and then in the meantime, the governor changed his rules, and so they went ahead and passed an ordinance. Now, you'll notice over here that I say they took legislative action, but it's got a question mark next to it. And the reason why is because they took an action in their town council meeting that they called an ordinance, but for the council members here, if you were to look at it and compare it to what you think of as an ordinance, it doesn't look like an ordinance. It looks like an executive emergency or an executive order, and notice that they do not have our same form of government. So they've called it an ordinance, but case law suggests that you judge something by its substance rather than by its title, and it doesn't establish code, it doesn't change the code, it just implements the requirement. And the requirement there is face covering for all public indoor spaces, which is a defined term. And there's exceptions for restaurants, medical conditions, enclosed office spaces, and personal services. Enforcement is through a $500 civil fine after a verbal warning, but knowing violation can be subject to a Class B misdemeanor, and the town can take civil action against the owners of public indoor spaces. And that one is effective until repealed. I forgot to mention up here that Logan's expires on August 30th, unless it's renewed. That brings us to the counties, and those are fairly similar. Grand County, Salt Lake County, Summit County, all three of those issued joint orders from the public health departments in conjunction with, in two cases, the county council, and in Salt Lake with the county mayor, requiring face coverings where consistent social distancing of at least 6 feet is not possible, reasonable, or prudent. There's various exceptions, though I did notice one of them has the exception for 2 and under, and another one has it for over 2. So there's a difference between whether 2-year-olds are included or not. There's also some additional exceptions we haven't seen in the ones I've already talked about for communicating with hearing impaired people. If there's an official determination that it would create a risk while working, and during transactions that are necessary for identification. Now, 2 of those expire this Thursday, and the other one expires on September 1st. And enforcement, Grand County's doesn't talk about enforcement. Salt Lake County's order itself doesn't talk about enforcement, but an FAQ on their website says that you can be charged with a Class B misdemeanor, but that law enforcement has been asked to use verbal reminders. And finally, Summit County says that the police are ordered to ensure compliance, but violations are an infraction, but states that the purpose of the order is to protect individuals' health and not to hold them criminally liable. So that was what I wanted to share as far as what I had found about what other communities have done. As far as the bottom line goes, it is my opinion that the council has the power to pass legislation regarding health and safety, and specifically with regard to COVID-19, with this caveat: you have that power until August 20th, because then the governor's order expires. Now, I think we all presume that order will probably be renewed, but it's anybody's guess whether there's no certainty of that, and there's no certainty that it will be renewed in the same form. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any questions for Mr. Jones or for our other presenters, Mr. Harding?
Thank you. Of course, then my mind goes blank. So we have until the 20th. You made it clear that the council has the authority to make these requirements, but we only have that until the 20th, and then that may be extended. But from what we've seen in other places, this can also be done through an executive order through the administration. Does the administration also have that deadline of the 20th, or is that only apply to legislative?
The administration has that same deadline because, again, the state statute that governs this specific instance of the COVID-19 pandemic says local ordinances and regulations may not be more restrictive than the states without permission from the governor. And so that executive order of the governor that grants that authority to do more restrictive regulations, that would apply to both legislative and executive actions.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question from Mr. Fillmore.
Brian, I don't think many of us doubt the efficacy of masks or social distancing. The problem I'm focused on is if we pass an ordinance, how do we enforce it? It looks to me, Brian, as things I read in the paper, as well as your report and others, that no one is really enforcing it. It ends up being more, use a lawyer's term, precatory. It's a statement of intent and hope. I've had conversations with Chief Ferguson. He sees enforcement as a nightmare. It's just multiple problems for him and his people. What is given given your study, is there anybody that really is seriously enforcing it as opposed to just warnings and education, please don't?
And I apologize if I missed part of your question. I had a little technical difficulty in the middle, but responding at least to the end, and then you can let me know if there was something you asked earlier that I missed. But I tried to emphasize as I went through that spreadsheet and through the list, the two things I tried to put the most emphasis on were the specific details of the mandates and what it said about enforcement. Because I think in my view, I think if the council is going to undertake such a thing, those would be the two questions that would deserve the most attention and would need the most debate. Would be determining the exact parameters of the order and when it would apply and when it wouldn't apply and what exceptions there were, et cetera. And then the second biggest question in my mind is enforcement. And like I said, from the 6 that I looked at, the only one that didn't, probably the strongest worded one was Summit County's, which did contain language saying the police are ordered to ensure compliance and enforce the order, but even then suggested that discretion should be used and that the primary purpose was not punishment. All 5 of the others specifically talked about in some form or another about asking the police to give only verbal warnings or to give verbal warnings first and to only cite or punish egregious violators. And I think Chief Ferguson can probably talk to this much better than I can, but I think that that could certainly be a challenge for the police officers. And there's any number of different ways that could be a nightmare from them, from anything from if they're trying to enforce against a mass gathering and how do they actually corral all of the people at the mass gathering to do enforcement, to people calling 911 because somebody at the store doesn't have a mask on and they're offended by that. So I think those are questions for the police chief that there are certainly, but I think that's a very important part of trying to decide how this would be implemented if it is.
Mr. Hoban.
I want to thank the BYU team for coming on and sharing the research. I actually don't doubt the research at all as far as effectiveness of masks. I think they are effective. I think common sense tells us that, covering your face makes sense, right? I think my issues that I'm taking with a mask mandate, and again, I'm all for masks. I think I have an issue with the mandate though, because I wonder how much impact we'll actually be having. How much will we actually be moving the needle? For example, the researchers stated that in their original research, they didn't have a BYU mask mandate in place. They didn't have quarantining as a factor, testing as a factor. All of those things will now be in place. And so I kind of look at it like this. If I mow my lawn one direction, I get 90% of the blades of grass cut. If I mow it the other direction, I get another 5 to 8%. If I mow it a third time, I'm very likely to not get much grass cutting it the third time. There's very little use in cutting that grass again. And so we've got BYU with a mask mandate. Public transportation, you have to have a mask on. We have, BYU will be doing testing and quarantine. And really, the researchers mentioned that the biggest thing is going to be student housing when they're going to be at home, not wearing a mask. And whether or not they actually can quarantine or are quarantined. So I would like to see what impact, because we're not starting from zero here. A lot of people are already going to be wearing masks. For example, I went around to some businesses this morning on Center Street to ask them, how is this going to impact you if we do a mask mandate? Most said they don't think it will have much impact at all because most of their customers are coming in with the mask. And those who aren't coming in are the type that aren't going to wear one whether there's a mandate or not. And so I think my concern is how much are we stirring the pot and how much are we moving the needle and the cost benefit of that. I like the idea of maybe looking at mass gatherings, and what we can do around there. But I just am concerned that, we already have a lot of people wearing masks. We have a lot of things in place. And what will a mask mandate actually accomplish? And will it just be us feeling like we're doing something, even though we really won't have much of an impact given the factors that the researchers laid out there. you know, because we're not going from 0 to 60 on a mask mandate. BYU will have a mask mandate. Students will be wearing masks. A lot of the businesses downtown or throughout Provo require masks already. So how much is a mask mandate really going to move the needle? I'm not trying to poo-poo masks, but I just have concerns about what we really will be accomplishing, and by asserting our authority as legislators in a way that's not going to make much of an impact.
Ms. Ellsworth has her hand up, but I'm wondering if either Dr. Abbott or Dr. Sloan would care to comment in response to that. I thought I heard Dr. Sloan alluding to some indication of the effectiveness of mandates, but I'm less clear on what evidence there is for that.
It's a great
Well,
question.
BYU has a mandate.
Well, they actually don't like the word mandate either, but it is required of all the community.
Yes, so it is true that there are a lot of people wearing masks already. And I think what a requirement would do would be to reduce the pockets of people that are not following that guidance. So while many people are wearing masks in public already, the people who aren't often tend to congregate together. It's not a universal distribution. And so it's these pockets of people who are likely to drive these kind of outbreak cluster scenarios. It's very similar to pockets of people who are anti-vaccine, and then you see these outbreaks of measles. So that's what a requirement would do. I would also hope that there would be a lot of signage along with a requirement for businesses and community gatherings to rather than it being something that the police are required to enforce in a heavy-handed way. But we want to be able to disconnect the community network from the BYU housing network as much as possible. And the current testing and quarantine plans that I've heard so far from BYU they're certainly doing their best, but it's not necessarily going to be sufficient.
And I would just speak to two of the points. The first one, we looked at nationwide mandates and requirements, and this question of enforcement is universally a problem. But even where there's no active enforcement, it looks like the average response is about an increase of 15 to 20% of the population wearing masks. So I really like the grass clipping analogy. And it looks like just the fact of there being a mandate, there is a substantial portion of the population where that's a final factor, encouraging them to do something that is admittedly inconvenient and sometimes uncomfortable.
Thank you, Ms. Ellsworth. We've got just about 5 more minutes.
Thank you to Dr. Sloan and Dr. Abbott. What a blessing to our city that the university is here and that we have such phenomenal minds in our midst. My concerns are that we haven't acted soon enough and that we have not done anything really to date to slow the spread as a city. And I think that responsibility rests on the council's shoulders right now, and that we need to act quickly. There's plenty of ordinances on the books that we don't enforce. I've been in zoning meetings where they say, oh, we're not going to enforce that on anyone, Shannon, don't worry about that. I'm like, well, I do worry about it because it's on the books, but they say, oh, we're not going to worry about it. So it's not unprecedented for the city to say, we have an ordinance on the books, but we're not going to quote unquote enforce it. And I think that's something that we need to take a long and hard look at. I'll be interested in hearing more data from Salt Lake County about what they've done and how they have enforced it or haven't enforced it, and how that's changed their emergency management responses. But I also think we should consider, in addition to a mask mandate, we should consider legislation where we prohibit gatherings of over 50 people or whatever that number is, with the exclusion of religious services. But yeah, I think we need to consider reducing those groups of people who are going to congregate without masks, so that we have more than one tool in our toolbox. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Mr. Fillmore.
Mr. Hanley, I know we're already over time, but I don't think there's an issue more important than this now facing the city. I would urge us to take 10 more minutes at least and hear two voices that we haven't heard from. I'd like to hear from Chief Ferguson. I'd like to hear from either Mayor Kafusi or Wayne Partner.
Chief?
Thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts, and I will try to just keep them short. One, remember that we can't arrest our way out of problems. And, you know, we're here to keep the peace and to keep the calm. And, you know, I hired on in 1991 and Rodney King had just happened. And for the last 30 years, this department and every department I know of has been trying to build trust with our community. I've had a couple of times in my career where parents have called me over and wanted me to come over and put handcuffs on their 14-year-old to teach them a lesson, to kind of scare them. And that's not the role of law enforcement. We're not supposed to scare people. We're supposed to create trust with people. And I really worry that, one, the realist in me says there's no way I can possibly, with my force, contact every person in the city who chooses not to wear a mask. And so I don't argue the data from the doctors at all. I understand the data, and I personally choose to wear a mask, but there's just no way we can accomplish it through enforcement. I would much rather and highly recommend that we continue to do it through education. My colleagues around the country, that's what they're choosing to do, is to enforce through education. And that seems to be the best thing. And as far as getting to just the time of things, and let me tell you a real number. Currently in Provo City, we have 5,575 warrants for people with Provo zip codes, active criminal warrants for their arrest. And of those, 348 are felons. And we don't have time to reach all of those people. And so it would be putting an undue burden, just an overwhelming burden on us to now to go out and try to enforce a mask mandate. I think we live in a community, and we all know that, where people will listen to reason. The majority of them are, and as we've heard from Mr. Hoban, the majority of the downtown businesses are seeing compliance. Those are my issues. Those are my concerns. The protests that we have seen already in the city, I can predict will grow if we become the only city who is actually asked to go out and enforce. None of my colleagues along the Wasatch Front have issued any citations.
So, Chief, can I ask a follow-up question? Because I think we're, at least where I'm most intrigued is by the idea of not enforcing, but you use the phrase enforcement through education. It seems like that's a very positive role that the police can play, and everyone in the community can play, right? And in the same tone that our Mask Up campaign has struck, it seems like we could get at least 15 to 20% more compliance with some sort of ordinance or some sort of official resolution that states our intentions a little more strongly, but hopefully doesn't put any more of an additional burden on the police. I mean, is that not a feasible outcome for you?
Well, if there's a mandate placed, there should be an enforcement action to it. And so when it comes to law enforcement, it would be some kind of a civil citation. I mean, we will certainly continue to push the education theme that the mayor has pushed out and encourage people, but, and I don't know about the number. I don't dispute Dr. Abbott's numbers. I don't know what that would be.
Mayor or Wayne?
I'd like to take a few minutes if that's okay, George. Thank you. And thanks, Dr. Sloan and Dr. Abbott. That's great information. I actually read the reports when they first came out, Dr. Abbott. So thank you for your hours of research and collaboration. It's always helpful. I have so many feelings on this, and I've been hit on both sides so heavily because, as you all know, this has become a political issue. It's become divisive. Sadly, that's where it's landed. So I actually wrote a statement so that I don't go off on any tangents of different thoughts and feelings on this. But so this is a statement I decided to write on behalf of this conversation taking place, and it's regarding the mask ordinance or / mandate that the council is discussing. And I want to start by saying thank you for the support and unity I've felt in our approach so far to masks. Our recently launched Mask at Provo campaign has been a big success. I acknowledge your support, as well as the support of the officials from BYU, IHC, and other community partners in that effort. Thank you to everyone who's gotten behind our efforts to encourage people to voluntarily wear masks. We're here to discuss the possibility of a city council order or mandate on masks. And thank you for letting me to share some of the reasons I have not entered a mask mandate. First, it's not in my nature or style to lead by mandate. I believe in self-regulation, I believe in education, and that's been the essence of our ongoing campaign to encourage but not require citizens to wear masks. Second, I don't love the idea of city leaders making health decisions. The local health department here is at the county level. It is the county health department, and together with state health department that is charged with protecting our health, they have the resources and mission to do that. Provo City has no health department. From the beginning of this pandemic, I've looked to our county and state officials to provide guidance to us, and I've done my best to follow their guidance. And to this date, our health departments have not encouraged me to issue a mandate. In fact, they've provided reasons why I shouldn't. And one reason that I thought made a lot of sense was concern about having a patchwork of different mandates throughout our county. We don't want each city having its own mandate with its own specifics. Third, I have concerns about enforcement. Easy enough for a city council to enter a mandate and then complain to the mayor and police chief when they see non-compliance. Am I excited about a tattletale culture being stirred up over mask enforcement? Does our police chief want to get photos sent to him of people without masks saying, "Where are the cops?" Not at all. And if you're seeking a total lack of enforcement from police, that too seems odd to me. But do I want to get into line drawing of which groups should be cited for not wearing a mask and which shouldn't? No. Fourth, and this is related to enforcement, but I also see it as a reason in and of itself, our police chief is strongly against a mandate. He says that the idea of police enforcing a mask mandate will cut against the relationship of trust he and his department have been trying to build with citizens here in Provo for decades. I know some citizens really want a mandate. They really want more compliance with mask guidelines. I know some of you want a mandate for Provo. I again thank you for cooperations towards our shared goal of minimizing health risks, especially for our most vulnerable populations. And I thank you for letting me share my reasons for emphasizing self-regulation and education in that noble effort. And just in conclusion, I can honestly say we have a wonderful working relationship with the leadership at BYU. I am on instant calls with anyone at any level if I need to be. And I believe in their leadership. I believe that if there was an outbreak of some sort or numbers started to tick up between us, the city, the county health department, and BYU, there would be actions taken. Just as you saw when the pandemic started and President Worthen sent the students home. I don't think we would ever see that big of an uptick in numbers as stated in the reports before there was some action taken by the leadership at BYU. So thank you.
Mayor, if I may, are there actions that you would be willing to take if the outbreak happened and we were facing thousands of cases within a month?
I think that would be a conversation between the leadership, between us and BYU and the county health department. I think it wouldn't be necessarily me alone. I would get advice and counsel from the BYU leadership. It's their university. The fact that they're still one of the only schools willing to do sports, the fact that they're still one of the only universities still doing in-person classes, I believe they believe in their protocols they have in place. And between our relationship and communication, we would take action as needed.
Would a mandate be one of those actions I mean, are you, I guess the question I'm asking is, are you ruling out a mandate no matter what, or is that still possibly on the table?
I would rule out a mandate unless it came down from the governor or from the county health department in collaboration with BYU leadership.
Ms. Ellsworth?
Why are we delegating the community, the health of our entire community to BYU? There's more than just BYU in our community. And they're kind of a city unto themselves. They've taken some really strong precautions. They're doing their very best. They're requiring masks for the people on their campus. But we are not BYU. And we need to look out for our citizens.
Exactly, and we are.
Well, we can't delegate this to BYU.
We're not. They're a collaborative partner. We're equals. We collaborate, we talk, we work together. The collaboration that goes on that you're so unaware of, you have no idea how much is going on behind closed doors with this. The fact that BYU is taking this step and opening up their university, they're not doing it just because they think it's a great idea. There is a lot of hours of collaborating behind doing this. And they're a partner, just as the Utah County Health Department is a partner. It's not BYU and it's not just me. There's a huge group of collaborators that are talking and discussing this constantly.
I'm a witness to the collaboration, Mayor. I think you know that. I'm not unaware of all the conversations that are happening. I think the concern that I have is that we have the possibility of a demographic in our city that's going to dramatically change the picture for us in very short order. And if we just go with the status quo, it does seem to me very likely that we're going to have a significant outbreak in a matter of a few weeks. And by that time, it will be too late to respond effectively if we don't have some clear instructions. I've been talking with BYU to find out more about what they're going to do to inform students about off-campus behavior. But that's actually, I'm not getting clear indications about that. And part of that is because that's an extraordinarily challenging problem. I am not interested in giving the police chief and the police force more work to do, but I do think clear signage, literal physical signage everywhere, and clear expectations stated by the city can help reduce the possibility of that outbreak, or at least minimize those outbreaks. And I think we have a responsibility as a city to be a leader in the county, and not just, I mean, if there's a patchwork, I mean, according to that theory, nobody sticks their neck out and takes a leadership role. And I think Provo and Orem, in the entire county, everyone's looking to us because we're having tens of thousands of students arriving here in a matter of a few weeks. And if we don't take leadership on that, then we're going to be in some big trouble. That's just my worry.
Are you thinking more down as like a resolution of some sort, a strong resolution, or?
Well, I think we need to have this conversation again, because I think we're not done. And I don't know. I mean, I think at least as far as I've talked about it with my colleagues on the council, with Dave Sewell and with others, at the very minimum, I would like to send a very strong message to students that large gatherings, parties like the kind we saw, are absolutely unacceptable and will not be allowed in the city. I am interested in some sort of way of encouraging, if not requiring, masks in indoor spaces. There seems to be some misunderstanding about the relative danger of indoor and outdoor, and that really concerns me. Those students themselves acted as if an indoor dance party with 200 students in close proximity was the same thing as an event at a park or at a school, which is not true. The risk level goes up significantly when we're talking about indoor activities. So I do think the research that we've heard is pretty sobering, because there's a limit to what we're going to be able to do. But I'm a little worried about saying, well, because there's no way we can control the outcome perfectly, then there's nothing more that we can do. And I just don't think that's the case. I think there's some ways in which we can minimize the risks and send stronger messages to the student population. And I think that helps BYU. It helps our public schools. It helps everybody to stay in business. I mean, it seems to me the free flow of our economy and of our business and our way of life that we're trying so desperately to hold on to depends upon people wearing masks. And if people aren't doing it, and even if it's 70% of the population is doing it, that's not good enough. If we can get it to 90, that's a lot better. And if a mandate or some sort of resolution from the council sends a stronger message and allows for clearer messaging, then I'm all for it. I don't want to do anything that's going to create undue burdens on our police. So but I think there's some middle ground there that we could find. I see two hands up, Ms. Ellsworth and Mr. Hoban, and we definitely are over time. So I know this is an important conversation. Please, let's move things along if we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, who has the mayor been coordinating with at BYU, and what information have they provided to the city that hasn't made it to the council?
So we meet with BYU once a month, if not more. I think this past week I've been on the phone with them 3 times already.
And who is it?
Different people that probably.
The risk management director that Dr. Sloan referenced?
It's higher than that, higher up than that. Discussing the transitions and what's going on and with where we stand. And I mean, I really do trust BYU. I trust their decision-making and what they're doing. If they were to come and say, and the county helped, and we all got around the table and the governor, and we said, we had the same conversation, I don't know what would come out of that. It would be an interesting conversation to have, but there's a lot of players in this that need to be heard. And the strong, I'm going to mandate this mask mandate. And then guess what? And when the vaccine comes out next year, you're going to come and ask me to mandate everyone get the vaccine. I mean, government, tell me what to do. Now, government, get out of my way and get out of my life. You're treading on some very scary property right now with where you're going with this. And my whole point is you've just got to open your mind to the fallout on all sides. It's everyone, Shannon. So with your strong opinion, there's someone equally with a strong opinion against everything you're saying. So you just have to be open-minded, listen to all, and realize the police are not our answer. Enforcement, I mean, I think of my twins that are 23. If a police officer gave them a Class B misdemeanor on their record for the rest of their life for not wearing a mask, so for every job they went to was there, shame on us.
The city's doing that in other ways though, right?
Well, we need to move on. Mr. Hoban, could you make your comment, and then we need to move on.
Well, I was just going to see if we could take more of a rifle approach as opposed to a shotgun. It seems like people are mentioning the concern of the parties and things like that. So I think, could we look at something that focused more on what the actual concerns are instead of just broadly saying everybody wear masks? Because it seems like Provo has done a pretty good job up to this point with the number of cases and such. And I understand that will probably balloon. My concern is it's going to balloon regardless of whether we do a mask mandate. But either way, could we look at a more surgical approach as opposed to something that's broad-based that actually addresses the concerns that we're having? I mean, this is coming up because the students are coming. So why don't we take something that addresses those specific issues, to take a look at something that addresses those specific issues as opposed to a broad mask mandate? Just a thought.
Mr. Harding.
Good discussion so far. There's a lot here. I wish that the deadline wasn't in 2 days, but and even more than that, a lot has been said about BYU and students, and even UVU students. There's a lot that reside in Provo, but I think that's definitely an area of concern. But tomorrow, our public school's open in Provo, And I think a lot of what we're talking about extends beyond these two major campuses. And so I do feel an urgency to consider this discussion and not necessarily just push it off for another month, because I do think I do worry about the exponential potential growth of infections. Just a couple of thoughts just broadly on what's been said so far. I have not heard anyone who's suggesting that we should consider these requirements. I haven't heard anyone talk about feeling like we need to use law enforcement in order to enforce these requirements. We can have a philosophical discussion about laws without enforcement, but I do think a vast majority of the residents of Provo and our community members are respectful of the law, just for the fact that it's the law, not out of fear of being enforced upon. And I do think there's a lot of people who justify not wearing a mask, well, because if it was all that important, then we'd have a law saying that I have to do it. And so I do think that having the law with the complete understanding that we are not going to be hauling people off to jail for violating or for being unaware of it, particularly, I'm not certain of that. I maybe part of the discussion can be, is it bad to have a law with no expectation of enforcement? But I don't think we should be discussing, what's it going to be like if we try to enforce this, because I don't think anyone has advocated for enforcement. The final thing, though, is I was really hopeful that we could have this discussion, maybe look at some of these numbers, look at what's at stake. From what I've heard, and there's different voices from BYU, but from what I've heard, it sounds like they are hopeful that they will have some, and particularly from the school district that we met with last week, that they're looking for support from the community, because they can only control so much within their classrooms. They need the community to support those measures and put some good measures in. And I'm not saying that they're asking for mask requirements, but they are looking for the community to support. And so I was hopeful, out of our desire to keep BYU from having to send their students home, and out of our hope to keep our grade school kids in school so parents can work, for all of those reasons, that perhaps we could not act solely as a council, but act in collaboration with the administration in seriously looking at options of perhaps mask mandates, perhaps some mass gathering restrictions, perhaps some business signage requirements. But at least at this point, it appears that we're not going to do this, collaboratively at this point. And I don't know if I support the council acting alone. I do feel like this needs to be done together. So I'm as urgent as I feel this is, and as quickly as I feel like some action, if it's going to have effect, it needs to be done soon. I don't support the council doing this alone. So I'm hopeful that we can continue this discussion very quickly and can decide if there's things that we, as leadership of Provo, can do and should do, that we can do that quickly.
Well, I think we are way over time. Not I think, we are way over time. And this is a really important discussion. I guess the question before the council is, would we want to have a follow-up discussion on this item? And if so, when? I guess the question about timing is at issue here. Our next meeting is on September 1st, which is a day after BYU opens. And so if we wanted anything to happen prior to that, we would have to establish the timing on that. But otherwise, we would presumably talk about it and meet again and maybe have a definitive vote on something on the evening of the 1st, unless the council felt that we should meet prior to that. Mr. Fillmore.
You're muted.
I can't avoid the sense that the city council's primary responsibility is to look to the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens, period. It's our number one duty as city government. And it seems to me that we can't wait 2 weeks, that we need to have, I would recommend a strongly worded resolution that we can pass tonight that highlights some of these things, take a surgical approach, and hopefully avoid an enforcement burden on the police. I think we need to take a very strong stand, and we need to focus on certain things beyond education and signage. Focus maybe on large gatherings indoors and outdoors, pushing our businesses a bit more perhaps. But clearly BYU, and I suspect UVU shortly, are going to reach out to us for some help on a very urgent basis. And the partnership concept is very real. I mean, BYU can do great things, but once the students leave campus, there we are, right? And so I think we need to act tonight, if possible.
Well, we can't act tonight because we don't have it on our agenda.
Well, then we need to take some emergency action. I don't think we can wait till September.
I agree.
Mr. Jones.
Yeah, I was going to make that same comment. And so I guess it depends on what the action is. So Mr. Fillmore, I think you've got probably 3 options. So on one extreme is, and I don't mean that as at an extreme action, but on one end of the spectrum is to pass an ordinance, which, as you indicated, couldn't happen tonight, and there's a lot of questions to be answered. Another option is to pass a resolution, which also couldn't happen tonight, and so either of those 2 options would require either waiting until September 1st or scheduling a special meeting between now and September 1st. The one action I think you could take today, if your primary focus, kind of playing off of what Councilor Fillmore said about sending the message, is you could, I suppose, in this meeting right this moment, direct council staff to prepare for the signature of the council some type of public statement or letter to the community about the council's desire or opinion or expectations or whatever it be about this issue. So that's, I just throw that out there for you to weigh your options as far as what can be done immediately.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
What is the motion?
Yeah, what was the motion?
Motion would be to do what Brian is suggesting, to at the very least come up with a strongly worded statement, call it an admonition or a directive that doesn't have the force of law, but to make clear what our concerns are, and then to follow that up with an emergency meeting to address something more concrete.
Mr. Harding?
I'll second that. I would like to do a statement as quickly as possible, and then perhaps if we schedule it for next Tuesday, not knowing exactly what that might entail, but that does give us a week to work with the administration, to work with other community partners, and explore what things we might do by ordinance, whether that's mass gatherings or additional signage requirements, those kind of things. But yeah, I think a public statement right off the bat, and then followed up with an emergency meeting in 1 week, I think would be wise.
But with all due respect, Mr. Harding, I wonder if we can't expedite that a little bit more. Is there a reason? I mean, we've laid out a lot of the considerations today. We need to do some talking amongst ourselves. We need to do maybe a little more research. We need to get a draft together, but why couldn't we have that Friday? The students are coming.
or Thursday, because staff is off on Friday.
Thursday, there you go. 2 days is fine with me.
I can support that. I will be out of town, so I will not be able to participate in that, but I think I can make my, I think if I haven't already, I can make my views clear.
Any further discussion of the motion? Yeah, Mr. Strachan.
Simply put, we'll need some time to put it together. If you want to have some public input prior to that, we'll need at least 24 hours to notice it. We'll do what you need done. If you want to meet on Thursday or Friday or Monday or whenever you need it, we'll prepare it. But we'll need some time to put it together and have you all vet it before we publish it.
Is there any reasonable grounds for believing that the governor's order would not be renewed on August 20th? I mean, that just seems kind of...
Wayne may have a different perspective, so chime in if you do, but my understanding is from the news reports this morning is that some of the legislature are resistant to the idea of extending it. Again, probably because of the pressure they're getting from different constituents. There's a feeling that if you leave it to, there's a feeling that if in the legislature that if they don't do it, the governor's office supposedly has said that they would reissue a new order. One of the questions out there is whether or not the federal funding that we have going forward depends on such an order being in place. So those are some questions that remain to be answered.
I think, Cliff, you've articulated that well. That is the major discussion going on in Capitol Hill. There is a special session this week. My understanding is that the state law, it was adopted in an earlier special session, limits the ability of the governor to do an extension without legislative authorization. And so that may certainly be part of the topic this week at the state legislature. So I think we'll have to find out how this develops politically on Capitol Hill this week.
So the motion is to, can we get more specific then about this deadline issue on Thursday? What's the motion?
The motion would be to have a meeting whereby we discuss and vote upon a draft resolution.
On Thursday?
On Thursday, yes.
And do we need to add into the motion a discussion on potential future legislation? What might trigger potential future legislation, case counts, death counts, etc.?
That might be too ambitious by Thursday. I don't know. I'm anxious to get a statement out today and a strong resolution Thursday, but again, one that doesn't burden our police department.
My preference, and I can make this a substitute if necessary, but my preference would be to have a motion that we to direct our staff to draft a public statement and to call a special meeting, whatever it's called, for Thursday for us to gather to consider an ordinance or a resolution for further action. But leave that open to let us decide what shape that takes later on. But the motion now would be to...
Yeah, we could even make that decision on Thursday, right? Whether or not we have an extra meeting the following week. I know, Isaac, you expressed concerns about getting public input. I think we want that where we have open city hall as a method. I will say I have received well over 100 emails already. So I don't think the public input has been light by any means. And it's certainly, I've certainly heard across the whole spectrum. I'm not speaking for everybody, only for myself, but I'm certainly willing to get more. But I do think we're also sort of feeling some counter pressure here in terms of the timing. Yeah.
If I may, I'd like to add one more thing. Just if we give staff permission to add this to the open city hall, so we don't have to go through that exercise outside of this meeting.
Good, I'm fine with that.
All right.
Thank you.
So any further discussion of the motion? I'll call for a vote on the motion then. I'll vote first. I vote yes. Mr. Harding?
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore?
Yes.
Ms. Ellsworth?
Yes.
Mr. Hoban?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
And Mr. Sewell is absent. So that is unanimous. So we apologize to our various guests who are both have been generously giving of their time to be with us, Dr. Sloan and Dr. Abbott, and to our group that's been waiting in the wings. This is an unfortunately important topic that needed more time than we gave it. So I apologize to all concerned, and we'll move on. Mr. Jones, you have a comment?
And this is probably a comment on Cliff's behalf. I don't know if he's thinking this in the back of his head, but the one question I have as a result of that action is if there is a public statement to be issued before Thursday, who approves what it says?
I was assuming, Brian, that we could get a draft together between now and this evening's meeting and circulate that and maybe vote upon it this evening. I certainly would send a list of concepts I'd like to see in the statement.
If it's not on the agenda, we couldn't vote on it, right?
That's
Well,
correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's not on the agenda for any kind of final action. On the other hand, it's also not the kind of thing that you actually need to vote on. So where you already have a motion authorizing staff to draft it and approve it, it could be approved simply by email. But I think the council should have a uniform expectation about whether council leadership is approving the statement and signing it, the two of them, and then it goes out, or whether a majority of the council needs to approve it, or whether all of those who voted in favor of the motion need to approve it before it goes out.
Well, I would be, if we're going to meet on Thursday, I would be happy, I'd be comfortable circulating it via email between now and Thursday, and then collectively approving it on Thursday.
If that's in the form of a resolution, not just a statement, I'd be in favor of that.
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
It would be the purpose of meeting formally on Thursday.
In fact, I think our motion is to that effect. So
yeah,
let's move forward with a resolution and drafts and discussion before Thursday.
Okay.
So just to be clear, because I think the motion mentioned it, but just to be clear, council as a body is okay with staff not working on a public statement separate from the resolution to be issued before Thursday.
Yeah, that's the consensus I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, you're welcome, Cliff.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you so much. I apologize again for our delays. We are moving on now to our discussion, a presentation regarding an update for Valley Visioning, and this will be presented by Cameron Martin, Ari Bruning, and Ryan Beck, who've joined us from Envision, Utah. We appreciate you being here, and again, apologize for the delay.
Not a problem. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I apologize for the being in my vehicle. I'm actually waiting to go into a doctor's appointment with a daughter of mine, so I've had to change my venue.
That's our fault.
No, it's all good. You know, I want to start off by commending you all for the robust nature and thorough nature which you've addressed the mask issue. I commend you for that. It's an incredibly important one. So thank you for your stewardship in that regard, and I support the actions that you're taking personally as a citizen of the great city of Provo. As a form of just a quick introduction, let me just simply introduce to you Ari Bruning and Ryan Beck from Envision Utah, who are valued partners with the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce. The Utah Valley Chamber, along with the Association of Chamber of Commerce of Utah County, have come together to help us as a county, as chambers, as municipalities, as businesses to plan for the future. And over the course of last year, we hosted a series of town hall meetings to glean feedback from the public about how do we grow in various ways, not just with the infrastructure, but also managing education and things of that nature. Today's discussion, though, will focus on five main areas of infrastructure, water, and so forth. Ryan will give more detail to the council in that regard. Our hope today is to get feedback, that this report that we share with you becomes a tool in your hand, and as a council and mayor in planning for the future, as we know Utah County is growing. And as it does, the epicenter of economic and political leadership and might will shift with it into Utah County, we believe, and the best thing to do is to prepare for that. And the reason the chambers are involved is because it's a neutral entity whose interest is prosperity of our community members and businesses, local businesses, and our cities. And through this, we receive information from the citizens that inform agenda that we will then promote through chambers, with our legislators, and through our cities, as to help garner resources and also promote good coordinated planning from city to city and within the county. This is not a one-size-fits-all or a one-and-done type of endeavor. It's ongoing year over year because we have much to do over the next few years, and you can't just bite it off all at one time. So with the partnership of Envision Utah, they've pulled together with UVU, BYU, and these various associations of chambers of commerce, information that we want to give an update to the chamber as a preparation of us going out more broadly to the general public with this results. We did not want you as civic leaders to be caught off guard, if you will, by saying things are being shared publicly without you first having your eyes on it and providing us feedback on what we can do to improve the final report. And we've received other information from other mayors and councils that have been valuable that will also help in that messaging at the end. So with that, I need to bow out because the doctor's appointment keeps texting me, we're ready, and I need to go back in. But you're in very capable hands with Ryan and Ari. And again, as a citizen of this great city, I thank you and commend you for the great work you're doing. I appreciate it, but forgive me for stepping out.
Thank you, Cameron. We appreciate you. And again, my apologies.
Hey, no problem. I actually found it very warming, the robust nature of that last discussion. So thank you. Not a problem.
All right. Thank you, Cameron. And thank you, Mayor and Council, for having us this afternoon. I'm going to give a little bit of a truncated version of this presentation, just looking at the time. All right. So if I gloss over anything, please slow me down and just ask questions. All right. So this is a project that started in the fall of 2018. We've almost been at this for about 2 years. And phase one was all about listening to the public and listening to our stakeholders and our steering committee. And we went out and we did 12 public workshops. We came to Provo High School on one cold January evening. I think Mayor Kafusi, I think you introduced us that night. Thank you. But we had over 400 people attend those workshops. And then we also did a phase one survey where we had about 2,800 people answer us online. And I'm not going to go through all those results because it would take a lot of time. But if you're interested, Ari or I or Leota, who's also on the phone, would be more than happy to talk offline. But what we did here is that we should, we need to focus on the areas you can see on the screen: housing, transportation, air quality, agriculture and open space, water quality and quantity, workforce and education. So we went ahead and put working groups, experts, found experts in all of these topic areas, and we put working groups together. And we even, as part of those workshops, we went out and we had the public draw on maps. We gave them land use planning chips, think like, place types of where housing could be or jobs could be. We also gave them markers and said, draw road improvements, draw public transportation improvements, all in an effort to get a better view of what Utah County looks like in 2050, in the year 2050, with the doubling of population by 2050 and adding 1 million more by 2065. So this is a culmination of some of those maps. You can see we had I think we went out and collected 72 of these maps. We put them into these heat maps, and you can see on the right here the quarter-acre lots, and that makes a lot of sense. Out here in Eagle Mountain and Saratoga, or maybe down south of Provo, there's lots of available land to build on, so that made sense of where some growth might occur. But we also saw city centers. Absolutely, Provo was identified as a major city center. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But on the road side and the transportation side, you can see where people drew road improvements, a lot going down west of the lake, even a bit into Cedar Valley. Not so much on this east side that's already built out, but we did see on the public transit side a lot of light rail being drawn down the center of the east side of the valley here, through Orem, through Provo, continuing to Spanish Fork. We saw a lot of information like that. But what we did is we took all of that information and we put it together into into scenarios, which we took out to the public. Happy to report that we had 11,000 people review and look at those scenarios and give us feedback. Online, we also did another round of public workshops to talk to people in person. Now, I'm not going to go through all those scenarios. That's a lot of. I chose one to show you, and so we presented the public with this. Scenario A was all about current conditions, the growth, the population I mentioned. Growth continues as it has for the last 20 years. So we place, think larger lots, think the way we've grown for the last 20 years. Scenario B was all about organized centers, where growth occurs in these mixed-use centers where we've made investments in our transportation. Scenario C, we heard that there's a lot of interest in growing west. Think Cedar Valley, Eagle Mountain area. There's a lot of land out there, so we explored that option. In scenario D, there's also a lot of land south of Provo, between Provo and Santaquin. Lots of agriculture land that could be developed into housing and jobs, office parks, that sort of thing. So we explored that in scenario D. And then scenario E, we tested urban infill, where we try to accommodate as much growth as we can in these existing urban areas. Now, I had maps to show you all this stuff, how it could grow, and they're pretty interesting. But looking at our time, I'm going to skip through those. This is how people weighed in. Now, there's two things going on here. In the blue bar is the public, how the public, those 11,000 people weighed in. We went ahead and did a random sample survey to verify our results to make sure that we were hearing the right things. So the good news is they, for the most part, lined up. But this is the how and where we grow results. A lot of support for that center style of growth and development, which is great. Talking to Provo, you guys are it's like preaching to the choir a little bit. You guys are doing amazing things in downtown Provo. We really appreciate that. Also, a lot of support for westward growth out there towards Cedar Valley. Not as much support for growing south into some of the agriculture land. We heard a lot about preserving and protecting ag land, but also scenario E, some support there for looking at infill development and seeing how we could utilize existing infrastructure. So with that, I am going to pass, let Ari say a few things about phase 3 and the vision. So Ari, take it away.
Thanks, Ryan. So we took all those survey results that we got and we brought them back to those same working groups that Ryan showed you, and they're helping us put together some pretty detailed goals and strategies for how to achieve the things that the public said they wanted. but this is kind of a high level summary of what they want as population grows. So convenient transportation choices, housing options, open space and recreation opportunities, continue to support local agriculture, manage our water wisely, have a well-educated population, and clean air. So those are the 7 goals that we put together. They're still in draft form, and we do have a lot more detailed strategies and so on for how to achieve those. If you want to review those and give feedback, we'd be happy to provide them. And we're looking towards releasing this vision this fall, probably sometime in October. And as part of that vision, since there was a fair amount of support for this idea of centers, so these are places where jobs, housing, shopping are all in the same place near good transportation, so that we're coordinating the transportation and the development together. We've been working on this centers map coordinated with MAG's regional transportation plan. And this is in draft form, and we're hoping, as we go to each city, we're getting a little bit of feedback, hoping it matches your vision for your city. But we're showing Provo as becoming a metro center, so becoming the center of Utah County as it is, and continuing to grow and evolve. So that's what we're showing. And as I said, the vision will come out this fall, and the idea isn't to have a one-size-fits-all for everybody, but to have some principles to guide us, because we're all in this together, and what one city does affects other cities. And with that, I'll close and let you ask any questions or make any comments you'd like.
All right, any questions for our presenters? We very much appreciate being updated on this. Yes, Mr. Fillmore, go ahead. You're muted.
I would have a request of these folks, and that is if they have a slideshow that they could share with us for our future reference, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, we can do that.
I believe Elizabeth already has it, but I'll just double check and make sure. If she doesn't have it, I'll send it to her.
This is Hannah. We do have their presentation, and it will be uploaded with the minutes, or with the republished agendas.
Great. I guess what I'm asking is, I know you have a more extended show, right?
We do.
If you could give us the extended version, that would be more helpful.
We can do that.
We'll send it along. We'll send it along. Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. It's a very important conversation. I've been pleased to be part of some of the earlier conversations, and we can't be too thoughtful about planning for the future. Yeah, Mrs. Ellsworth, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that there were 400 participants in the, what were they, workshops? Is that in Provo or in the whole valley?
That was just round 1 in the county, and that was in person. Yeah. So
okay.
we did another round, so probably 800 people total in person about.
In the county?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. If there are no further questions, we will thank you very much for the presentation, and we'll look forward to future conversations, and we'll look for that information when you send it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And again, apologies for the delay. We're appreciative of your time and generosity. Okay, we'll turn to item number 3, which is a discussion regarding ranked choice voting. We are going to have to curtail this conversation a little bit. We're pleased to have Stan Lockhart with us here, who's going to make a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm delighted to be with you today, and no problem going over as in my role as interim CEO of the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce. Your last 2 issues were absolutely relevant and important in my life right now. So it's all good. Can we put the PowerPoint up there, Hannah?
On it. And I will grant you remote control so you can click through at your own pace.
Oh, great. Okay. I'm going to go through this. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, and then when we get to the end, we can backtrack if you'd like, and we can, answer questions from each one of the slides. But essentially, our county clerk, Amelia Powers, gave us a tagline. She said, ranked choice voting is better, faster, cheaper. It works. And that's after doing this in Payson and Vineyard last year. So let's see here. There we go. We had this conversation a couple of years ago, so most of you know how ranked choice voting works. It was also used in the Republican and Democratic state and some county conventions this year. And so you may have had a chance to use it in those venues. But essentially, voters rank the candidates in order of their preference on the ballot. The voters' first choices are counted. If one of those candidates gets above 50%, then you don't go on, that candidate wins the election. If no candidate gets over 50%, then you go back and you eliminate the last place candidate. You redistribute the votes from the eliminated candidate to the voter's next choice. Then you retally and you see if a candidate gets over 50%. If one does, then the voting ends, and so on. So you just keep going through that process until a candidate gets to over 50% of the vote. Okay. What am I doing wrong here to get this to the next slide? Okay. In 2019, we had two cities, both of them in Utah County, that chose to use ranked choice voting, Payson and Vineyard. They had a very successful experience in both cities. They're two very different cities, Vineyard being one of the newest cities in our county, one of the fastest growing cities in America, Payson being one of those legacy cities that was created when the pioneers came. So two very different profiles of voters, very different in how they do things, and yet both of them had a very successful experience using ranked choice voting. Oh, Hannah, I'm not doing a very good job getting me to the next slide. Okay. In terms of voter experience, 86% of voters, to give you some framework for this, our county clerk, Amelia Powers, did an exit poll of voters in both cities. 86% found ranked choice voting very much or somewhat easy to use. Only 4.2% of the voters found it not at all easy to use. 82.5% of voters said ranked choice voting should be used in future elections. One of the things we discover with ranked choice voting is that if you've never used it before, then you really don't like it. But those who have used it, who have gone through that experience, they come away with an incredibly positive experience. Next slide.
Stan, we have a question from Ms. Ellsworth.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious if Amelia Powers will be gathering data this next round of elections from Vineyard and from Payson to see if those numbers increase in terms of citizen satisfaction.
Yeah, here's what I will tell you. Amelia is a believer in ranked choice voting. And our goal is to get rich data sets of voter experience so that here's the biggest knock on ranked choice voting. We've got all this data from other states, but what do Utah voters? What if they're different? What if they don't understand it like others do? What if they don't figure it out? And so we have a strong desire to get that rich data from the voters. So we absolutely will be doing the same type of exit polling this year that we did next year that we did last year. In terms of the experience of candidates who ran in those elections, 87.5% of the respondents reported a positive impression of ranked choice voting. No candidates reported a negative impression. Those are both winning and losing candidates, I'll have you know. As far as continuing to use ranked choice voting, 75% of candidates, after going through that process, they liked it. They want to continue using ranked choice voting in their cities. One city council candidate, I really like the approach and think it should be adopted by more cities. From Vineyard, I love that it's easy and it makes a lot of sense. Next slide. So in this past legislative session, Utah lawmakers voted to commend Payson and Vineyard cities for their use of ranked choice voting, as well as Utah County elections officials who ran a phenomenal election. That was one of the other concerns last year. We've had so many challenges running elections in Utah County. Can we get our current system going really well first? And what Amelia and her team, and she has an excellent staff of elections people. They had no glitches at all. Amelia said in a webinar that we had last week, or maybe it was 10 days ago now, she said, look, it may have taken 20 extra minutes from the time of ballot design to the time of tabulation to do ranked choice voting for a couple of cities. It was really no additional effort on our part to run those elections. In addition, legislators and the governor officially encouraged all 249 cities and towns throughout Utah to adopt ranked choice voting for upcoming municipal elections. One of the reasons for that is that they're seriously considering using ranked choice voting for partisan elections. With our recent primaries, we had a Republican primary with 4 candidates running in 3 races. We had 4 candidates for governor, we had 4 candidates in the 1st congressional district, and we had 4 candidates in the 4th congressional district. And each winner won with a plurality, which means they won with less than 50% of the vote. Next slide. Unsolicited, I can tell you I have never had a discussion with the governor about ranked choice voting. Unsolicited last week with KSL, he said, in terms of ranked choice voting is something I would support, he said. I think it has advantages. If I can't be your first choice, I want to be your second choice. So I think it brings a more civil campaign, and I think that's a good thing. And we can concentrate really on the issues at hand. And Governor Herbert in that statement lists 3 advantages of ranked choice voting. So that's positive. Next slide. So why ranked choice voting? There's a handout. I don't know if you've gotten it today yet, but there's a handout on the right side. I've got 10 separate merits of ranked choice voting. And some of them are a bit nuanced, but each one is a separate reason why ranked choice voting makes sense. And if you read it and you think about it, they're all wonderful reasons to try using ranked choice voting. But I would just encourage you to spend some time with that one pager, because in it, we've got the guts of why you would want to do it in the city of Provo. Let's go back to the slides. So taxpayer savings for cities. If you use it in your general election, and I've talked to a couple of council members about the possibilities of using it in your primary election, if you have any concerns about it at all. But you can save half the cost of an election, which in Provo is a pretty substantial number, because you pay roughly $2 per registered voter, per active registered voter, to the county for them to run your elections. And so you'll save exactly 1/2 the cost of an election, which adds up to some pretty serious money you could use on other priorities in the city if you chose to use ranked choice voting in your general election. They're shorter, less expensive city campaigns. The filing time for ranked choice voting is roughly 30 to 60 days later for candidates than under a traditional election system where you have a primary. So you have a shorter campaign, you have a less expensive campaign. I had the Mayor Draper last year when I talked to him about ranked choice voting. He said, Stan, I spent $50,000 in the primary to run against exactly the same person that I spent $50,000 to run against in the general election. It would have been so nice to just do it in one election. It's ready for cities to implement. The county has recently got brand new election equipment. ES&S, the voting equipment vendor who was awarded a state contract, is capable of running ranked choice voting elections. And more than is capable, it's native to it's just a part of the system. It runs exactly the same way as you would if you were running a traditional election. Next slide. Voters more fully express their will. For me, the heart of ranked choice voting is that voters get to more fully express their will. I look back at this actually goes down to the spoiler effect as well, but let me tell you about more fully expressing their will. In the 2016 presidential election, we had many candidates, but the 3 that had a chance in Utah were Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and Evan McMullin. Evan McMullin was rising in the polls. He started with nothing. He was over 20% in the polls when the Trump campaign said, a vote for McMullin is a vote for Clinton. And immediately he crested in the polls and started going down a little bit because voters have to make that calculation. You know, it's not always who I want the most. Sometimes I've got to vote for one person so that I don't get the other person under a plurality system of voting, which is our traditional voting. You get a winner by majority vote. We just had this challenge with our 2 congressional districts in the governor's race. In Congressional District 1, the winning nominee for the Republican Party got 31% of the vote. It's hard to say that he has a mandate from Republican voters with 31% of the vote sending him on to the general election. And so this guarantees that your winner gets more than 50% of the vote. It eliminates the spoiler effect, which is the effect that I just talked about. You get a long shot candidate who can draw away enough votes from the leader and the person that not the majority prefer, but the next person down actually can slide in and get elected. Next slide. So those are the main advantages of ranked choice voting. This particular slide is a bit off. We had 2 deadlines the last cycle. This cycle, we only have 1 deadline. You need to send to the elections office and the lieutenant governor's office at the state capitol a resolution stating your intent to do ranked choice voting by April 15th, 2021. Next slide. Again, those who have used ranked choice voting, I think we all agree with Amelia Powers. It's better, faster, cheaper. It works. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Lockhart. We appreciate you giving us that information, and it's good to have you with us. Mr. Fillmore has a question. Go ahead, Mr. Fillmore. You're muted.
There we go. Stan and Elizabeth, can you tell me, do we have this as part of our packet, this slideshow?
I'm not sure you do.
The handout was included in the email with the chair notes, and the presentation will be republished with the agendas. I can also email it to you if you'd like.
Great, thanks very much. Stan, I just have one question for you.
Yeah.
You make a very compelling presentation, very logical and beneficial, it would seem. I just recall a conversation I had with Senator Kurt Bramble, a couple months ago. And I said, if we'd had ranked voting, we wouldn't have had that mess with the Republican primary. And he said, well, there are real problems with ranked voting. Sometime I'll take you to lunch and tell you. But we haven't had that lunch.
Go have lunch.
So I'm going to ask you to play the devil's advocate and tell us what Kurt's concerns would be.
You don't have enough time to listen to the experiences that Kurt and I have had as we've discussed ranked choice voting. We've had many a conversation. Here's Kurt's most recent position. In light of what happened in the Republican primary with 4 candidates, with the split vote where 31% got one candidate nominated, and that candidate is a great candidate. It's not a knock on the candidate. It's the process that we're using to select our elected officials.
No, I agree.
And there are relative benefits and weaknesses to every system. Ranked choice voting is not perfect. Council Member Fillmore. Traditional voting is not perfect. So you literally have to look at the merits and the weaknesses and make your choices. Here's what Kurt told me recently after the primary, though. He said, Stan, I think you've won me over. He said, but it's kind of like Hobson's choice. He said, do you know what Hobson's choice is? And I'm straining to remember my BYU experience. And I said, isn't that the best of 2 bad choices? And he said, bingo. He said, it's the best of 2 bad choices when you have this plurality system during the primaries. He said, I'm in favor of ranked choice voting to solve that primary issue. So he's actually a bill sponsor of a bill that's coming up in the next session to use ranked choice voting in partisan primaries. So he's come a long ways, Bill. I'd like to say that I've converted him, but I think I've only got him part way. His arm is still out of the water.
All right. Well, congratulations on that conversion effort.
Mr. Jones.
Yes, thank you. I had a question and a comment, and wanted to make it while Mr. Lockhart was part of the conversation, so he can weigh in and tell me if he disagrees, or if he does agree, maybe he can mention to Senator Bramble how to fix this, to sponsor something to fix this. You mentioned in your presentation that the only thing that needs to be done to participate is for the council to send a resolution to the Lieutenant Governor's office. The confusion I have about that is I'm looking at the statute. The statute says that in order to participate, the city needs to send written notice of its intent to participate, and the election officer needs to sign a document saying that the municipality has the resources and capability necessary to participate. It doesn't say in the statute who from the city sends that written notice. And from my way of thinking in our form of government, and thinking about the fact that city code or state code has this really confusing section that says the governing body is collectively the legislative body and the executive branch. It seems to me that election administration is an executive function, particularly where the election officer works for the election branch and not for the council. It would seem to me that the written notice in our form of government would have to come from the administration rather than from the council, and that even if the council were to send a resolution expressing a desire to participate, that Provo still could not participate unless the election officer who works for the mayor signs the statement regarding resources and capabilities. And I'm sorry to spring that on you.
Well, okay, it's worthy of discussion. Here's what I would tell you. If we need more clarity, it's as simple as going into a legislative session and making more clarity, right? So, I mean, this is not a huge obstacle, although I'm really hopeful that Mayor Kaufusi supports it. She didn't support ranked choice voting 2 years ago, I think primarily because she didn't want to be the guinea pig. No one wanted to be first. And I think in cities up and down the Wasatch Front and even off the Wasatch Front, they just really were hesitant about being the guinea pig to try ranked choice voting. So Payson and Vineyard decided to do it. Now that they've done it, and we see that there is no challenges at all to voters get it. They don't need to be you don't need to have this intense education. Voters understand it intuitively. You don't need to worry about the process of how we design ballots all the way to the canvassing. You don't have any, I mean, people brought up all sorts of problems that could exist there. There are no problems there. We've addressed, I think, most of the concerns that the mayor and the council brought up 2 years ago. So I'm optimistic that we all do this together. But if for some reason we need to clarify what's in the law, it's as simple as going into a legislative session and doing so. Every ranked choice voting bill in the last 4 years has passed overwhelmingly, almost unanimously in both bodies, in the House and the Senate in our legislature.
All right, any other questions or comments about this topic? Okay, well, thank you very much. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Ellsworth.
Oh, I was just going to ask if I could send some questions later on to Mr. Lockhart as we need to move on.
Council Member Ellsworth, I would hope that you just pick up the phone and call me.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Lockhart. It's a pleasure always to be with you.
Thank you.
We'll move on then to our joint discussion with the Planning Commission regarding the process of updating the general plan. I sent a note to participants that we are foregoing our bathroom break. I apologize, but we're over time, and we think we might be able to catch up a little bit here and get us to our closed meeting on time. So this is, we're going to start with a presentation by Robert Mills, if I'm not mistaken. Is he with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
Thank you, Chair Handley. And I really think that we can make up some time in this discussion. And I just wanted to thank all of you for all of your help and support as we kind of went through the RFP process for the general plan that has been out for a few weeks and actually closed yesterday. And I appreciated all the responses that I got back regarding the document from both the council and the planning commission. And so just to kind of remind everybody what the real purpose of this is just a statement from the RFP. It says that the intent is to restore the general plan as the paramount guiding document for planning, housing policy, infrastructure, sustainability and smart growth, and economic decision-making. It should succinctly set forth the goals and policies for future development, stewardship of resources, and overall direction for the city. So really our intent in going through this general plan major update revision process was to just create a document that all of us, both those of us as staff, you as decision makers, and the residents of Provo can really rely on as Provo goes forward into the future on the values that we're going to espouse as we see our city change and develop and grow and adjust to what the future might hold. So I just wanted to quickly go over some of the content that we had asked for in the general plan, and then kind of where we go from here. So we had asked, these were the essential elements that we had asked for in the RFP. Data analysis. We really want this general plan and the whole process to be data driven and to have really good data to base our decisions on as we put into this document different housing needs, different future land uses, all of that type of information. We wanted to make sure that whomever is going to be helping us with this has the capacity to really not only gather data, but also really interpret it and help us put that data into our general plan. Current and future land uses. The land use portion of a general plan is really important, as all of you know. It kind of guides the development process for the next 20 to 30 years, at least gives us good direction. Housing. I'm sure that many of you have seen that there are so many housing issues inherently with growth, but then as a result of everything that we've been experiencing with the pandemic, housing becomes a real concern for our city. And we want to make sure that in our general plan, we have really good information regarding our existing stock, how it's going to turn over in the next and focus our efforts and make sure that all of the needs of our residents are met. Transportation. Transportation is a huge part of the general plan in its relationship to land use, how our citizens and our residents are able to move about, how people coming to our city and experiencing our city, generally they rely on all of these different transportation scenarios, and we want to make sure that in our general plan, transportation becomes a multimodal conversation. So two more, sustainability and smart growth. As we move forward, we wanted to make sure that our general plan reflects the fact that we do live in an environment that is very susceptible to many different things. And we wanted to make sure that as we grow, we do it in a good way to really utilize the resources that we have and make sure that we help to prevent some of the situations like poor air quality, increased heat island, all of those things that are happening. We want to make sure that we address it in our general plan. And then economic development. We have to make sure that our city remains a viable place to not only live and work, but to do business, and that we continue to have those economic opportunities for everyone. So to kind of give you an update on where we're at, I mentioned that the general plan, the RFP, closed yesterday at 2 o'clock, and I was given the statistics today. I believe that there were 14 different consulting firms that intended to submit a bid, actually 13 that intended to submit a proposal, and 7 of those attendees actually submitted an offer. So, or excuse me, submitted a proposal. So now we are in the process of going through those as a selection committee, and the people on the selection committee will be myself, Gary McGinn from the department, Bill Pepperoni, and then Deborah Jensen from the Planning Commission, and Laurie Urquiaga have volunteered after I begged and pleaded for them to be on that committee as well. And then one thing that we need from the council is actually 1 or 2 members who would actually like to be on that committee and serve as part of the selection folks. I talked to Cliff about this morning, and he suggested that we go through and just present that opportunity to the council members and anybody who would like to on the council be part of that selection committee. If they could just inform the chair, and then Mr. Strachan suggested, Chair Handley, that you would select 1 or 2 of those council members to serve on that committee. Our intention is that over the next few days, we'll create a system to evaluate all of the different proposals, rank them, and then hopefully on next Monday, that we'd be able to meet together, discuss all of our choices and the decisions and the scores that we've given everybody, and hopefully make a decision on who to award a contract to. As far as RFP proposal, that's where that's at. Next step after a consultant is selected, we would be working with them to establish, exactly what it is we're trying to convey and do in Provo, and help them in their process of data gathering and and then going to actually present that information to the public and to receive additional information. And then they would be, kind of collaborating with us as we go through the process of updating it. And then hopefully by early fall of next year, we'd be able to have something that we could take back to the Planning Commission as a document to be adopted. We anticipate that the Planning Commission members and the City Council will be heavily involved in this process throughout the whole time. And then we just want to make sure that we can get an official document back to you folks in time to have that adopted by at least by the last meeting of December 2021. That's really all I have as far as an update. I did want to just quickly mention and express appreciation for all of the planning commissioners being here today, but then to also just give you all a chance to ask questions, interact, express any concerns or any desires, things like that, that you hope to see from this process as we move forward. So that's all I have, and I would turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. I want to apologize. I think maybe in the rush of the meeting, trying to catch up and also being online, I didn't take the appropriate time to introduce all of you and welcome you formally to our meeting today. So we're joined by Deborah Jensen, Lisa Jensen, no relation, I assume, Lori Urquiaga, Brian Henry, and Daniel Gonzalez. We appreciate you being here. We love and appreciate the work and service you do for our community. And we always find great benefit in reading your reports and helping us and guiding us in our decision-making process. We take it very seriously and are very appreciative of the tremendous amount of service and hours and effort you put into your work. So thank you, and thank you for being here. Ms. Ellsworth, you have a hand up, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just be really interested in hearing from the Planning Commission their perspectives, not only on the general plan, but also on planning in general in Provo. For those of you who haven't had a lot of experience with the Planning Commission, it's awesome. And it's mandated in state law, and there's provisions for it in federal law. And the mayor has done a fantastic job selecting fantastic people, many of whom are professional planners in some capacity. And so I just have a ton of trust and respect for the people who serve on that commission. And I'm just interested in getting their feedback on big picture stuff. It doesn't have to be the general plan, but if we can improve Provo City in any way, especially in the built environment where you touch those kinds of items, I'd be interested in hearing that feedback.
Any response from the Planning Commission? Ms. Jensen, go ahead. Deborah Jensen, yeah. Oops, you're muted. There, I just unmuted you.
Thank you. I appreciate your kind words. I think we have a great group serving on the Planning Commission. And one of our strengths is that we have a wide variety of backgrounds. There are certainly some of us who are professional planners or urban designers, and then there are others in other fields. So they bring a very diverse but very valuable perspective to bear on the issues that we hear in front of the public. I think that about a year and a half ago, there was a lot of discussion about the general plan and the need for an update. I don't think we were quite ready to proceed yet, but the Planning Commission actually started reviewing the sections of the general plan. And for some people who were new to that document, it became clear that it's a huge task, and it's more than a volunteer planning commissioners could tackle on their own. And we recommended at that time that a consultant team be brought in to update the plan when there was budget and availability. I think, especially in light of how Provo has changed. I've only been in Provo 7 years. It's grown tremendously in 7 years. Not just our institutions such as Intermountain Healthcare and BYU, the MTC, but our population has grown, our transportation issues have grown, our housing issues have grown. And so I think this is an opportune time to really step in and go through this process and become more aware through the public process of what the issues in Provo are, what the opportunities are, and how we can best move forward. I think in terms of keeping the Planning Commission in the loop, I think it would be great if moving forward once the process starts, that key planning commissioners or a range of planning commissioners be included in a stakeholder group if that's going to be established. So that's a group that meets regularly with the consultant team and with other city leaders, and can therefore convey what's happening in the general plan update process back to the rest of the planning commissioners on a regular basis. And I think we also have some perspective. I know the council hears applicants come before you for rezonings and general plan amendments and things of that nature. but we hear it as well. And a lot of times, I think we may hear it more stridently than you do. So we may have a little bit different perspective to bring on some of the issues that might be of value. So I'm very happy this is happening. I look forward to kicking the process off. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other responses from the Planning Commission to Ms. Ellsworth's question? Ms. Lisa Jensen.
Robert Mills pretty much said everything that we had talked about, but I just wanted to affirm that so you didn't think we were opinionless. And the other part I think that really spurred this on was a desire to make it user-friendly so that there wasn't so much disconnect. We get a lot of requests with people who come forward wanting a general plan change or a zoning change who don't understand the lingo or the connection between what one document represents and another. And I think as we've discussed some of the changes or simplifications, that's part of our goal, is to make it a very user-friendly document so that you don't have to have a degree to understand what the intent of the document is.
Ms. Urquiaga.
Yes, I would second everything that both Ms. Jensens have said. And I, as one of the non-planners on the Planning Commission, it's been a really educational experience for me. But one of the things that I would like to see is they call it legalese in the law profession. Plannerese is probably what it might be called, but we definitely need to get away from that and get to something that the community can work with and not be confused about. I'm happy to see that we have been working to fix some of the discrepancies that have been in the various codes over the last while, but having a coherent, unified whole seems to me to be a really desirable thing. And I'm hoping that's what comes out of this process.
Yeah, at the risk of offending anybody's religious sensibilities, I've always kind of thought of the general plan as a sort of messy Bible that gets quoted out of context to justify, contrary aims and objectives. And sometimes that's maybe our fault of sort of trying to twist it to our own interests or needs, or it might be a function of a document that is itself a little bit too big and sprawling and contradictory itself. So I do think one of the things that can really benefit the city will be a more clearly worded, streamlined, and principle-based document that I think is easier to use and more effective in actually guiding us, steering this ship in the right direction. I think it's a very complicated process in my 2.5 years of being on the council to actually plan for and enact future plans. It's difficult, and it takes a lot of work from a lot of different people. Our two bodies are among the most centrally important in that process, but I think this document's got to be in just first-rate condition for us to really move forward. Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, a few years ago when I was first appointed to the Planning Commission, I was kind of bugged because I felt like the Planning Commission was asked to be the Development Review Commission, and they haven't until just now had a lot of opportunities for true planning. And they are a diverse group. They represent many parts of the city. They represent different demographics within the city. They have varied and important professional experience. And so I'm happy to entrust them with this important document. But I hope that as we go along, we can think about the end user as we create this document, and that it is unified and cohesive, and that there isn't too much plannerese, so that the planning commissioners and the council can rely on it in making future decisions, right? So that we don't get too short-sighted when we're approving developments, any one person or any group, but that we can have this document that helps us realize a bigger picture and a vision for Provo in 2040 or 2050.
Is it your feeling on the commission that the RFP, yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know, this is maybe a little bit of an unfair question, but I guess given my earlier comments about the kind of document we want to have, I have no idea what that looks like. I just know that it's not helpful, for example, if a proposal comes forward for high density housing and we say, oh, the general plan says that we need more diverse housing types, so therefore it meets the general plan. And then the next thing you know, somebody's saying, yeah, but it doesn't meet the general plan's objective to have, to protect family neighborhoods or something, or single family housing. And so, you know, in light of the potential there for contradiction in the document, do you feel confident that our RFP, and maybe if we've taken a brief glance at the people who have, the firms that have come forward to express interest in being a part of this process, that we can end up with a document that is more serviceable to us in that way? Just sort of asking generally to anyone on the commission if you have thoughts about that. Ms. Jensen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. I do think that the reason the general plan to date is not as succinct and clear, one of the reasons, is because it's been just sort of piecemeal revised for many, many years as time went on, whether that was through a motion through Planning Commission and Council, or whether that was a discrepancy. I know I think it was last year or the year before, there was a decision made to update the general plan, and it was just kind of a one document married to the general plan, and that was the result. So I don't think it's really been vetted and gone through and really thought through in terms of what kind of document we want as a community, what's missing, where are the emphasis wrong, and certainly there are contradictions in the existing document, and we're aware of those. They come before us, and staff does a really good job of interpreting what the general plan states and what it supports as it is written today. So they've done a very good job of trying to make the best of not a perfect situation.
Thank you, Mr. Harding.
Thank you. I think we absolutely need to make our code, make our general plan as clear as possible, as easy to understand as possible. As things evolve over years, you know, yes, incompatibilities and inconsistencies can creep in and whatnot. And it's always easy when an issue comes before us where, you know, our vision and everything all kind of points in the same direction, and it's you know, those are the 5-minute ones that everyone, you know, votes in favor of, and it's a slam dunk. But I think where the council, you know, really can show its wisdom is when there are not clear-cut answers. We can say things like, you know, we value a high quality of life for the people who live in Provo, and we can also say that we, you know, support economic development and commerce. And it's easy to argue that having strong commerce improves the quality of life. But there are definitely aspects of commercial activity that can negatively impact some of the quality of life of residents. And so often these principles may be in tension with one another. And I think that's where the Planning Commission can give some good recommendations, and the council hopefully can exercise some wisdom in balancing these competing concerns. I think anywhere you look across public policy and law and all of these things, that the most interesting issues are always where there's competing interests, competing public interests, and competing principles that are in tension with one another, and trying to find the right balance. So I think even if we hit a home run with this general plan update, we're still going to have issues that come before us where you can argue one side, you can argue the other side, and you just have to make the best decision.
You mean it's not going to be easy? I just wanted it to be like a code that you just punch in the data and it just says vote yes, and I don't have to use any judgment. If that's not what this document's going to do for me, then I don't know. No, sorry, I'm being totally flippant. And
we'll give you the Cliff Notes version, George.
Yeah, city planning is challenging. So, Robert, can you review again what you said at the beginning about what you? I mean, I know this was for discussion mainly, but you mentioned appointing some people, and could you just review that again?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because you might, I assumed you wanted a little more feedback on that as well.
Yeah, so essentially what we would like as part of the selection committee to have council members, since you're going to be so heavily involved in this, if you would like to be on that committee, if you could just submit your name or your intention to Mr. Handley. And then Mr. Handley, if you could choose one or two of the council members who you feel would be best representative of the council members, just to help us as we go through the process of selecting a consultant.
Okay.
Mr. Strachan, did you have any additional information for Mr. Handley on that, or?
What's the timing on that? When would you need that name or names?
I do not. Just reach out to George or myself and let them know if you're interested on doing that, and then we'll get George on Thursday to decide who he wants. And obviously, if only one person applies for it, then that becomes easy. If two of you apply, that's still easy. If 5 of you apply, George has a choice to make.
Okay. All right. Anything else that we want to discuss regarding the general plan, the RFP selection process? Any issues that the Planning Commission, any suggestions for us or requests? Mr. Henry, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I appreciate this opportunity to get together with all of you. I'm kind of the new guy on the block. I don't know what's been discussed. I don't know what has been processed thus far. I've also never been through a general plan update, so really not really sure what the process is. So I'm going to kind of shoot from the hip here. Working as a land planner, the biggest thing I hear from developers is just, what does the city want? What do they expect? What do they want? And having worked with developers in cities where the city did express very clearly what they wanted, the developers were thrilled. They made better projects. They included more amenities because the amenities weren't lost in the back and forth trying to figure out what the city wanted. And it just turned out to be better projects, happier clients, and it was just a better all around process. Now, thinking about a general plan, I've also asked many developers, I often ask the developers if they've ever read the general plan of the city that they're trying to develop in. And I would say that probably all of them have never read a general plan. The few I've talked to them about them think they're too generic, think boring, they can't hold their attention, and they just don't like using them. Most of the time they're asking me, how do we get around them? So as I think about a general plan update for the city, I think it really needs to be a document that inspires people, that in some ways it breaks the norms of general plans and inspires people to want to develop in our city. It inspires the public about what our city could be, and really to make it something that stands out to the point where other cities are saying, hey, have you seen Provo's? We need to be more like Provo. And maybe if there's regulations that prevent us from doing that, it becomes something that we take to the state and say, look, we need this, and the city is inspired by it, and they want to make the changes to make it happen, so that we can create a plan that is just, it's astounding. It's not been seen before, but it is intuitive, and it is engaging with the public and with the developers, and just makes very clear who Provo is, who we want to be, and who we want developing in our city. And just a final thought, that there's been a couple of times recently where the city has changed the code on land that hasn't had a lot of interest. And based on that change, the developers saw, oh, this is what they want. And all of a sudden that land developed exactly how the city wanted and exactly how the intention was. Now, the process to get there, I know it's already moving. We're looking for consultants. I don't know how to affect that. But for me, Provo is a very large city. To come up with one document that covers the whole city does feel like a Herculean effort. But to come at it in a more neighborhood level design, I think we can really get to the heart and be very specific about what we want and how we want it to happen. And I think by doing that, we'll attract the right developer that develops in the way we expect, that makes all of our lives easier. So in conclusion, I think while this may be a very difficult update, and to get it right is not going to be, we can't rely on everything we've done in the past, but can we work really hard on this to make our lives and those who follow us, make their lives so much easier when a developer comes to develop in our city?
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Very helpful insights. Any other comments? All right. Well, oh, Ms. Ellsworth. Nope.
Yeah, sorry. I can't not comment on the general plan. I'm a planner. I just agree with Mr. Henry in many respects. I think the more specificity that we have, the better developments we'll see. Because if we say we want a family-friendly community or a walkable community, every developer is going to interpret that differently. So specificity is going to lend itself to really good developments. And yeah, I would promote that. I think we need just a little bit more depth, and we'll get better developments. We'll get what we want sooner. And I think developers will be more satisfied with the process because they won't have to go back and forth with the planning commission or with the council. But does the planning commission have any other concerns outside of the general plan? We don't get to meet with them very often.
Mr. Henry has a hand up, and then Ms. Jensen.
Oh. Just to piggyback off what Shannon just mentioned there about specificity, to really say who we want to be instead of trying to cater to anyone who might come to town, really speaks to, I heard once from a mentor of mine, we don't want to be a futon. A futon is a terrible couch and an even worse bed, but it serves both purposes. That specificity, being very specific about what we want and where we want it in a city, is what's going to make the developers go, oh, I'm going to go develop in Provo because I know exactly what they want and I'm their guy. Or, you know what? Provo really doesn't have anything that's my style. I don't really want to go fight a city council to get what I want, so I'm going to go to a different town that's easier to get my stuff through.
Deborah, did you have your hand up? No.
I did. Thank you. I just wanted to build on what Ms. Ellsworth and Mr. Henry have both already said. One of the things that was pretty striking to me when I first read the Provo City Plan as we have it today was that the most important part of it, which should be the vision for the future, was very vanilla and not specific at all. There were no clear objectives other than, you know, single family housing. It was just very unspecific. So I think that I would like to see out of this process some really deep digging happen so that we can, as a community, articulate the vision specifically that we want to see for our community. And by vision, I'm saying get really specific, set objectives to accomplish your vision, whether those objectives are about sustainability or housing or air quality, whatever issue we find is most important, and that set strategies to accomplish those. And also measurement. How do we know if we're moving in the right direction? How do we go back and tweak things if we are not? So all of those things address, again, that topic of specificity. That not only gives the development community a better feel for how to proceed with us, but it also attracts business and gives residents a certain level of certainty about what to expect as we move forward. Of course, there are always people who don't want anything to ever change, but we know that's not the way life is. And I think if we have a clear vision and objectives and strategies to get there, it will help tremendously in the long run.
Thank you. Mr. Harding.
This may be my contrarian nature coming out a little bit, and I absolutely agree with what has been said. I do want to kind of maybe cap just a little bit on the specificity. You know, if we set our vision that we want to be a walkable community, and you know, align some of those principles with that and whatnot, but not necessarily say that what walkability means is, you know, sidewalks have to be this way, or, you know, and get down into I think there can be too much specificity. So when potential developers have good ideas, or, you know, as best practices evolve, you know, now we're running into a general plan that kind of has become is so specific that it doesn't allow for some of that innovation. So I don't believe anyone's been arguing that, but I just wanted to kind of throw out that I think specificity can get too far if we're not careful.
I'd like to just make one other comment, and that is just to speak in favor of the particular interest that that has been expressed in sustainability and sort of smart growth and air quality. These are issues that I think we cannot afford to neglect. I think we need to bring the very best thinking to bear on these questions. So I am hoping that we'll select somebody who has real capacity in this area, because it's just impossible to tackle something like air quality or sustainability without comprehensive, holistic thinking going on throughout the document, so that we don't make the mistake of sort of addressing I don't know, questions of design without thinking about questions of materials, without thinking about impact on air quality or on the environment generally. So I think I know that was part of the RFP process. I know that Robert mentioned that as something that we're looking for, and I just would urge the committee to select the very best in that regard, because I think what's exciting, of course, is that there is a great deal of energy around these kinds of questions, and innovations and forward-thinking kinds of plans. And so hopefully we're tapping into a professional resource that is going to give us that best thinking, and not something that's outdated or I mean, it kind of goes without saying, when you're planning for the future, you want to be future oriented. So hopefully we're going to be able to accomplish that with this selection process. Well, we're out of time. We appreciate having you all here with us, and we hope that you will, as a planning commission, continue to communicate with us whenever you have questions or concerns. We want to be collaborative and effective partners with you, and we certainly want to know when you feel that we can do things differently or better, and we appreciate the chance to meet with you today. Even under these circumstances, it's good to be with you. I guess I'm supposed to put "with you" in quotes or something, but we're kind of together in some virtual sense, right? So we appreciate the time that you've given us today. All right, we are at the conclusion of our meeting. A closed session has been requested. Utah Section 52-4-204 allows closed meetings for specified reasons, including the discussion of the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual. Mr. Jones, do you want to say anything about what has been requested?
Yes, I just commented a closed session has been requested to discuss sale or purchase of real property, which is one of the approved reasons. So it would be appropriate for a motion to close the meeting.
All right, I'll look for a motion on that.
So moved.
I'll second it.
All right, Mr. Harding made the motion. Mr. Fillmore seconded. All in favor? I will vote yes. Mr. Harding?
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore?
Yes.
Mr. Hoban? Mr. Hoban, are you with us?
Yes.
There you are. Ms. Ellsworth?
Yes.
And Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Okay, that is 6 votes in favor with Mr. Sewell absent. Thank you all for your time, and we will now reconvene on Microsoft Teams. Is that correct, for our closed session?
That's correct, yes.
All right, we'll see you
in about 5 minutes.
So 4:05, not right away.
Yeah, 4:05.
Okay, we'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you all.